All right, so let's wrap this up by talking about what everyone wants to talk about heading into this weekend, and that is the Stanley Cup playoffs, because we have to absolutely talk about it. 5 Canadian teams are in: the Leafs, the Habs, the Sens, the Oilers, and the Jets. You know, this is where people's minds are at in Canada, and not because they don't care about politics, because this is like the grand scheme of politics in Canada. I was going to do an episode on this during what was the Four Nations Cup, when Canada won the Four Nations Cup just shortly after Trump took office. And depending on what happens in these playoffs with the Canadian teams, because that probably that same type of Canada nationalism is going to be brought back up. And so I might do a whole discussion about this. But yeah, it's essentially like how hockey and politics in Canada, they go hand in hand because of that aspect of the game. And you can see, like, when the NHL, I made sure to check right away, when the NHL put out the playoff schedule, no Canadian teams are playing on the night of the federal election on April 28th. And that's more than a civic-minded move to bolster democracy or television ratings, but it's a polite nod between these two institutions that both know exactly how this country runs, and that's on vibes, on ritual, and on just enough nationalism and regionalism to keep people sedated, but also like politically activated in like a certain type of tribalism. The Canadian state knows that hockey is the real Canadian civic duty, the real, mass religion, and hockey knows its place in the state apparatus. The beautiful partnership, really. The French language debate was rescheduled 2 hours earlier to accommodate the Montreal Canadiens game. And if they won the game, all they needed to do was to get a single point and they would advance to the playoffs to play the Washington Capitals. So yeah, electoral participation bows to the sacred slap shot. And honestly, you can make a case that the viewers probably got more emotional catharsis watching the Habs clinch the playoffs than, listening to Carney or Blanchet wax poetic about Canada's sovereignty. Politics in Canada has become absolutely indistinguishable from a televised event. There's a puck drop, there's a face-off, there's color commentary. And at the end of the night, the scoreboard resets and essentially nobody's life changes. And the leaders' debate functioned exactly like this. We had a cast of characters, the charming technocrat, the stoic populist, the scrappy underdog, and the regionalist off in the corner. And we watched them perform. We clapped for the big hits and we booed for the flubs. And then we went home. And I know it all sounds very cynical, but good, because the cynicism is rational in this context. That's where we're at, a very deep cynical moment politically and just in our reality as a whole. And it's not because voting is going to change anything. We've become nihilistic and apathetic to it, because it's the effectiveness of such a thing has become completely diluted into this ritual of spectacle. And so when every party accepts the same economic structure, when every debate ignores the horrors on our streets and the genocidal policies abroad and the colonial violence on the land to which this country sits, when every news anchor just smiles and nods through a segment on it being normal that butter costs $9, it's like, what the hell are we doing in this country? Even the debate structure, it just reinforced that spectacle. The leaders were at never any point expected to answer hard questions or face off against each other. They were expected to land zingers and avoid scandal and be personable. The moderation didn't just fail to drive up that confrontation in the way that it should. It just especially on Thursday night in the English language debate, it just didn't feel like a political debate. And obviously it was encouraged to be like that by design. But this is the thing, is that it feels like, when I'm talking about this in this way, it feels like I'm watching pro wrestling and then standing up and saying this isn't real, because who's watching this and taking it on the face value besides people who are just passive consumers of politics because their lives either depend on it or they're drawn into the spectacle because it's such a connection to their identity. Not citizens, but viewers. And we're coached to react as such, to post, to take sides, not to organize, not to agitate, not to confront the power that we're seeing demonstrated before us. at least not in any type of meaningful way. And so that political energy, especially from young people, especially from people who just get involved in this stuff or just start getting exposed to it, it all gets funneled towards this pre-approved arena where the absolute most radical act is voting for the party that supported really bad policy and then got cold feet and backed out of it. That's like the best we can do as far as progress in this country. The limits of our imagination of what we can achieve through electoral politics are now what the boundaries are of acceptable discourse. Like, it's been completely boxed out. And again, a good example of this is just how the rhetoric in the entire debate, especially in the English language one, because of Pakin's right of center centrism, he just wasn't allowing any type of true progressive talking points or any type of fundamental, like, real world solutions besides just either spreadsheets from Carney or blaming, grievance from Poilievre. And the Poilievre campaign, they lean on this heavily, and that's why he markets himself as this, social media star. Singh knows it too. That's why he leans into the TikTok aesthetics as like a fighter while shouting down the rich and then also hawking chairs as a social media influencer. And then Carney is really like Canada's final boss of the spectacle. He very much reminds me of Obama in that, like, he pacifies progressive voices by just saying, like I said, I hear you, I'm listening. That's not a practical approach. I have a more practical incrementalist approach where my friends are going to make a lot of money off of it. The guy was literally the Bank of England and is somehow running on the vibes of like an outsider and a newcomer. And the media, they're just spoon feeding the public. There's really no opposition to it from any type of established Canadian media. And that's the terrifying thing about how effective all of this is from the Liberal Party. I do admire their savviness, but it is scary because now that they're moving right of center, it's going to legitimately make people worse off than they were. Once this government gets a mandate, it's not going to be great. Obviously the provinces have a bit more power federally, but income tax and things like that, it's going to be a doozy under Mark Carney because he is, like I said, a neoliberal fixer, and his ultimate goal is going to be to make the economy sustainable for foreign investment, essentially. And again, it's not something that can inspire hope, because if you explain it the way that I just did, all it does is sap the will out of you, because everybody sees it, and the instinct is either to pick a side or just tune it out because of apathy or nihilism or exhaustion. And both sides really respond to serve the system, obviously, even the left. And that's why I end up most of the time, even in an ironic way and even in not, siding with the bloc into many of these issues, because the nationalism of the bloc creates a scenario where at least one party is it's being demonstrated. There's like a universalist approach to it where you can demonstrate, right? Like, this is how easy it is. And obviously, again, Quebec is a very unique position, but it's not even just that. It's about being able to understand the political dynamic of the country and then moving within it rather than trying to dictate it yourself, because you can't do that. The only way you can do that is with, mass politics and the will of the people. And that's absolutely what they don't want. They don't want for the people to break that fourth wall of politics and realize that this whole thing it's as fake as a widow's smile. As I said, it's kayfabe. It's not real. It's a shitty B-list movie. The sets are cheap, the script is recycled, and the producers are all the same washed up parasites who put out slop for passive consumption. So yeah, hockey. I have to just say hockey because it's this element of the team. This element of like everyone's on the bench with you, the whole country or your whole tribe is on the bench with you. And it just feels very much the same. We consume it very much the same way. We cheer for it the same way. We also we cheer for it, but we're also critical of it. You know what I mean? I always compare like the NDP to the Leafs, or they just always let their supporters down. in the worst way. And ultimately, it's the same. You cheer for your team, you yell at the refs, and then you get disenfranchised. And then the cycle comes around. You give up hope, and then the cycle comes back around, and then you jump back on when it looks like there's just a little bit of a chance. And we're going through that right now. But the difference is that no one ever told you that winning the Stanley Cup was going to make your life better. But we have this like weird, just the way in which it's like such an idealist way of understanding politics, that even if the people that we want to win, that is a moment when the struggle starts, not when it ends. And we're just so confused about that because of just the way that we consume politics. It's just very fucked up.